Hello, everybody, and welcome to, I guess this makes our fourth Pivoting to Digital Organizing webinar. So this is going to mostly be about Nextdoor today. I think you wouldn't be here if you at least hadn't heard of Nextdoor, but it is a neighborhood social network. So what distinguishes Nextdoor from other platforms is that it is hyper local. And so, in a little bit, we'll talk about whether or not Nextdoor is even in your neighborhood and how to find out if it is, and then how you gain access, because there are a couple of different ways you can gain access, but it's not like a Facebook or an Instagram where anybody can, create an account and instantly start entering groups that they want to be a part of. In order to be in the neighborhood where you want to be posting and seeing posts in Nextdoor, then there are a couple of ways that Nextdoor is going to ask you to verify that you actually live in that neighborhood. So I am going to assume that most of us have access to Nextdoor, but I also want to spend a couple of minutes just going over how you might get signed up too. So before we do that, I want to plug the Texas Count Census Day activities. And so on your screen now, you'll see a flyer that kind of breaks down our schedule for the day. And we'll revisit some of these items later on today. But for the most part, I just wanted you to see the schedule and have some direct links to RSVP for these events. I would assume that if you've been on any of our Pivoting to Digital webinars over the last couple of weeks or have joined a weekly update, that you may have already seen this because we did make it a point to email it out to you all this morning. And so if you are interested in participating in any of these, I would start by just clicking that link, txcounts.me/census day, and reading through what we envision for that day. I will say that for the 12 p.m. session, which is Let's Spread the Word Together, and even for the 2 p.m. Rethinking the Ground Game, virtual breakout sessions, a lot of that will be putting into actions the tools that we have covered in our Pivoting to Digital Organizing series. So we'll try our best not to make it duplicative, but we are, there will be more people joining that and those sessions. And so we may recap a couple of things, but really it's now applying those tools in real time in a way that these initial training series haven't allowed for. So please join us for any and all of our Coffee and Census Day kickoff, which will have plenty of time for Q&A, and the 2 virtual breakout sessions in the middle of the day. We also think that probably the most fun aspect of the day will be our hard to count happy hour, which is really just because we needed alliteration. It's not necessarily only for hard to count populations, it's for everybody in the census. And that will be an Instagram Live. If you would like to be a part of that, or you know anybody who you might like to be a part of that, really the plan is just to go live with as many people who want to sit and visit with us, starting at 4:30 for anywhere from 5, 10, 15 minutes. And we want to use that time, since we are all census champions and we spend a lot of time just thinking about how to get out the count and the significance and the importance of the census. We really want to use that time to talk about what the census is to us personally. So maybe, whenever you got to that race and ethnicity question, you were like me, a little stumped, and you have a little more nuanced answer than maybe is covered in our typical kind of census promotion and get out the count efforts. And so we want to make that as personal as possible, and also have the chance to reach as many communities as possible. And so please follow us at Texas Counts on Instagram, and send us a DM on there if you want to be a part of our Hard to Count Happy Hour Instagram Live session. But back to our regularly scheduled programming. So we think Nextdoor is powerful, personal, and passionate because it really has reach into neighborhoods at the household level. Just before we started the webinar, then we were all sharing some of our personal experiences about Nextdoor. And we know that Nextdoor is typically known as a place where people go to complain. It's kind of for the curmudgeons of our neighborhood. The most common Nextdoor post you'll see will be barking dog, or what was that loud noise? noise, or here's a Nest video of somebody who stole my Amazon package. Let's find this person. But Nextdoor, as a fairly newer social network, is starting to evolve. One of the most recent features that Nextdoor has added is that public agencies are allowed to post information. And so now I, in addition to signing up for newsletters from my council members or from the county judge, I really find Nextdoor to be the best place to just get quick, digestible information about what's going on in my broader community through those public agencies. Planning departments can be a part. It is powerful for public agencies, certainly. And then also there is a way to connect not only with your neighbors, but with local businesses. And so later on in this, I'll provide you some sample messaging that you might send to folks in your neighborhood, whether they are other households or businesses. Now, I will say that Nextdoor really is not for this kind of scaled messaging. Whenever you post, then anybody who is in your corner of Nextdoor, and we'll kind of look at what that is and how many households that typically lands as for my neighborhood, but it will vary. And the best way to get as many eyeballs as possible on your post is to put it just out there for the whole neighborhood to see, and then see what other neighborhoods, surrounding neighborhoods, you have access to post in. However, for some of that kind of targeted outreach, then you will really only be able to send individual messages to your neighbors and to your businesses, and we think that that's well worth the time. And then the last thing I'll say about Nextdoor is that it has the ability to connect with affinity groups. So if you were in our second session, which was about Facebook basics, then we talked a little bit about the power of groups, because people go here and they are part of a discussion that truly interests them. And so we think that you can leverage the power of groups in Nextdoor to just kind of get out in front of people who are visiting social media because they want to connect locally. The assumptions that we make about the people who are most active on Nextdoor is that they are already civically engaged and civic minded. And so why not meet them where they want to have a civic discussion? So let's dig right in and first just talk quickly about how to, I'm going to assume that for the next 5 minutes, you are not a part of Nextdoor and you want to see if you can get signed up. So you go to nextdoor.com to connect with your neighborhood, and you can, if you are totally fresh, you've never received any postcard, or nobody is inviting you from within your neighborhood, either by email or by social media, we'll kind of look at what that looks like later on, then you can just enter your address, and it's going to take you through a couple of steps once you do that. So put in your address, and I wanted to use kind of it's not a funny example, it's actually a lovely place. But I was curious if an area or a city as small as Cut and Shoot, Texas, which if you're in Houston is about, I guess, about 50 minutes north of central Houston, and Cut and Shoot, Texas, which I assume has a population of probably less than 2,000 or 3,000, was on here. So I started searching Cut and Shoot. And just like almost any tool these days, then we're all drawing from the same data set. And that is, if you look underneath can't find your address, it says powered by Google. Google is nearly all-knowing and all-powerful, but sometimes they just can't map every area in the way it historically has been delineated geographically. And so whenever you search something like Cut and Shoot, and you know Cut and Shoot is a city that's 50 minutes north of Houston, and it's just not showing up here, then don't be discouraged, because that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not on Nextdoor. And so what you would do is just type in a full address. Let's assume this is your home address, unless you happen to want to join as a business. And go through the steps here. You will need to enter into your neighborhood, and I won't go through them right now, but just know that I put in the address for Cut and Shoot City Hall, and it took me to a wonderful little screenshot, or rather a wonderful little map that I forgot to screenshot, that said, yes, Cut and Shoot is on Nextdoor, and then I could have joined. So start here, put in your address, see if you have the ability to easily join. Now, I will give you a heads up on what will happen if you are signing up in your neighborhood for the first time. you're going to see something like this. And on even before you would have gotten to this page after you sign up, then it would have asked you to put in your mobile number or your cell phone number. And that is not necessarily so that Nextdoor can go and, kind of send you marketing texts or anything like that. And we're just going to trust that they aren't using your cell phone number to sell. But they actually will look up your mobile phone carrier and try to verify your placement in your neighborhood by your phone number. And so that is one of the ways you can be instantly verified if you're just signing up for the first time. The other way, and because I know a lot of us are really motivated around Census Day and then taking action during April, which is Census Month. However, we don't necessarily need to we know that our activities aren't going to stop by the end of April, then you could very well go the verify by postcard route, in which case they will send you a postcard in the mail that's going to give you about I think it's like a 5 or 6 digit code. And then once you receive that, it'll give you instructions to come back and to verify that you got that postcard at your address. And so any way you can get verified is lovely. If you aren't a part of Nextdoor, I would do that today, right after we finish on this webinar, or even if you are a good multitasker and want to go do that right now, let's see if you can join right now instantly, or if you need to verify in one of these ways. And then later on, I'll show you how you can make sure that others in your neighborhood are using it by inviting them. And you can even use the opportunity to invite them as a way to promote the census in your area. And so we'll revisit that later on. Let's just dig right into Nextdoor. And so you're all signed up and you're placed in your neighborhood. Then most of us will be familiar with this screen. One of the things I personally like about Nextdoor is that it's not super heavy on features. They tend to add features, not as quickly as like a Facebook or an Instagram, and so it's always pretty intuitive. I will show you right now, just related to COVID-19, I noticed right-hand side, you can click on something called View Map, and I also just thought this was a handy map to look at so that we can get a feel for how people are currently using Nextdoor. And so on this map, it's showing my specific neighborhood, and then it'll also give you an example of how you can reach other neighborhoods that are surrounding yours. So they kind of count your main core neighborhood, but then you have access to usually a couple thousand households after that. So right here, they kind of drop a pin in the neighborhood, and they ask if I want to offer help. And so this is all new to the COVID-19 era, and what these dots are, basically the green dots are neighbors who can help, and then the farther out we go, you'll see some of these surrounding neighborhoods. They put those on the map as well. And so just so you can get a feel for how, if you're newer to Nextdoor, how big the neighborhoods actually are. I think if you've ever been to Houston, then you're basically familiar with the map of Houston and something we call the loop, the 610 loop in Houston. And so I'm kind of, this is a pretty good, kind of map size for what we think of as Houston's urban core. And then in green here is my particular neighborhood, and it's not all of what we consider to be the Houston Heights, which used to be a city and is now broken up into neighborhoods in here. So it's not the full 8,000. What they call Houston Heights East, which again is just some random term that Google came up with for my neighborhood at some point, is about 5,000 households. So once you're signed up for Nextdoor, then you'll want to make sure that you build out your profile. And a couple of those things you'll just knock out very quickly whenever you are setting up your account. As you can see, I don't have a very complete profile, even though I'm a Nextdoor user. I don't really need to add a number. I don't need to add, they do have my email address already. So there's no great value to this. What I wanted to actually come here for was to show you a wonderful example of, again, if you're newer to Nextdoor, of kind of Nextdoor organizing, because there are ways to cut through the noise. And the reason I share this example is because I want to show how we, can really rally the neighborhood. locally. And so I provide you some sample messaging that you can use to reach out to folks on Nextdoor. But I think the more hyper local and the more personalized you can create it, that's the most impact you'll have, right? And so this is a perfect example of how I use Nextdoor to really just focus on one block. There was a variance. So the Houston Heights is a historic neighborhood, 100-something-year-old neighborhood, and it is mostly residential. However, we don't have zoning in Houston, and the de facto zoning that we have in the Houston Heights happens to be like minimum lot size and the historic restrictions that we have as a historic neighborhood. And so unwanted development, so to speak, comes up pretty frequently, and how people are able to build stuff that is inappropriate for the neighborhood really is just a factor of land size and maybe some sort of setback restriction or anything like that. And so I found out, and I'm one of those curmudgeons in the neighborhood, I guess, that they were building a 7-story hotel with a huge parking garage right across the street from my house, where I love to skateboard and used to take my dog, and I just didn't want that to happen. It's a vacant lot. I think that it should be homes, single-family homes, and this variance was totally inappropriate. And so put this out there to see if I could create some imperative to my neighbors about, hey, we need to go to the Planning Commission, which is our zoning board here in Houston, and we need to talk to them about this variance that they're about to grant for the 400 block of Columbia. And I made sure to put in the 400 block of Columbia where I live because I wanted to make sure that this came on top of the radar for my neighbor, my neighborhood, and those who it was most relevant to. Kind of post a picture of the variance, yada, 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 and it looks like 93 comments later, we got totally organized around block walking and getting a petition signed and lining up speakers, and we defeated that variance. So after that variance got denied for that hotel, then it proved to the neighborhood that we really wanted this for single-family residential housing to keep with the historic character of the neighborhood, yada, yada, yada. And so now they're going to build some houses over there. So just in case you were curious about how you connect the dots between there's a barking dog in my neighborhood, somebody get it to be quiet, and some civic engagement and some community organizing, I just wanted to provide that very hopeful example. The other reason I say that is because there is a lot of negativity on Nextdoor, and I don't want you to be discouraged. It does draw out people like me who are the curmudgeons of the neighborhood, and so maybe you'll post something and somebody will say, this doesn't have anything to do with the neighborhood, I don't care about the census, or they may do more of a political read on the census and start to make political commentary on it. Just know that it may happen to you as you become a census champion on Nextdoor, and don't be discouraged. Because one thing we also know about Nextdoor is that lots of people will come in and start to take up for you and uplift your message. So that is creating a post. Let's say you've never done this before, and you just signed up for Nextdoor, maybe you have an account and you've never used it before, then there are a couple of ways that you can start to just promote the census through a post. So you'll see that I clicked up at the top and said select or make a new post. Then you can choose a category, and I started thinking through this, and really none of these fit squarely except general, or none of these categories really fit our message of, hey, have you responded to the census? And I have been thinking through a way to make it more interactive with the poll. People do like polls on Nextdoor, and so I am going to use the examples very quickly of message and poll. So if I wanted to send a message about Census Day tomorrow and invite people to participate in the Census Day activities of Texas Counts, then I might come and put a picture of the Texas Counts join Census Day activities. Heads up. Tomorrow is Census Day. I will not waste your time by writing a post because I want to come back and put a little more thought into how I word this post today. But I just wanted to show you what it looked like to just make a post and then show you what I was describing. I can choose my neighborhood of Houston Heights East, which is only 4,060 neighbors, or I can choose Houston Heights East plus nearby, which is all of those surrounding neighborhoods that had those other numbers on the offer help map. If for whatever reason I didn't want to send to all of those, then this would give me the opportunity to exclude some of those. Again, since you have the reach, and since you have the hyperlocal kind of data and reach, then you might as well come up with a message that is truly applicable to the neighbors who kind of self-identify as part of the same community, right? And so I will just give you an example. We people in the Houston Heights, then we are Houston Heights people. We were the first, neighborhood that was here, and we have our own heritage. And so I might uncheck Norhill because that was founded by John Stude and not Oscar. What was the guy's name? The guy who founded my neighborhood. And not the people who are in the neighborhood founded by William A. Wilson, which is Woodland Heights. And so I would just go and systematically uncheck those folks until I got what I considered truly to be my neighbors, my community. We share the same neighborhood association, and I can send a message to them that is, just about us Houston Heights folks and not anybody else. The same thing would apply if I was making a poll post. And so I have been toying around with the idea of even sending one to everybody in my surrounding neighborhood and saying, have you completed the 2020 census? I would put in a message similar to the sample message that I'll show you all in just a little bit that says, did you get your invitation to self-respond? Did you know that most of us are only getting an invitation to self-respond for the next couple of weeks, and we may not get a paper form until the Census Bureau sees that we have not responded after a certain period of time. So that may be a great opportunity for a poll. Whenever people respond to a poll, they also have the option to comment. And so you may find some people. And the great thing about whenever you originate a post on Nextdoor is that you really only at that point can customize how you get notified of that. I will say even in the most active of neighborhoods, it really doesn't get as crazy as kind of Facebook commenting does. And so I would look out for those notifications on somebody like, hey, I didn't get mine. And then we can say, well, why don't you go to my 2020 census.gov and see what you should do. You don't need your census ID, which is on the letter, to respond. You can respond as non-ID if you haven't gotten it, or something to that effect. I would talk about events a little bit, and I am also planning to go and post about the Texas Count Census Day event, but for our group right now, we already know that our ability to kind of have events is hamstrung by the social distancing we're doing, and so I just won't spend any more time on that. Because we're about to go into a totally different category of things, I'm just going to glance at the comments and Q&A and see if there's anything that I can tackle really easily. Oh, let's see. Hey, Katie and Robin, can you tell me if you are seeing Nextdoor right now?
Yes, we are. We're good.
Excellent. That was just, I was just making sure. Okie dokie. So before we go on to our, talking about the different ways you can identify neighbors and identify businesses and groups, I wanted to show you, once you're in Nextdoor and maybe you want some help uplifting the message of the census, or alternately, somebody is a part of Nextdoor and you want to make sure you're instantly verified so that you can start to post about the census. Right next to the profile image, if you were kind of walking somebody through this, then you'll see this little person plus, which just says invite, where you can invite your neighbors or you can have them invite you in this example. Now, I will say one of the great things about sending an email invitation is that you can use that as an opportunity to not only invite people, but send them a message about the census in the email invitation. So I clicked email invite, and whenever I click that edit message, it can't be too terribly long, but you can even say, I'm making sure we're all connected because I'm interested in tracking how our neighborhood is doing responding to this, to the 2020 census. Since all since self-response can be done online every day, we can track the progress for our neighborhood. We want to make sure we get as much self-response as possible, as soon as possible, before enumerators will need to come knocking on doors and yada, yada, yada. It's important to get out the count. So just know that inviting people to Nextdoor could provide some added value to them with some news you can use about the census. Let's go now back to our home and talk about some of the options that I think that you will be using in your census championing. I will also say, too, move on from that, I do think it's worth going and looking at the map once you're a part of Nextdoor for your neighborhood, because this gives you an idea for who's a part and who's not. So let's say, you know, remember me and all of my neighbors were really riled up on the 400 block of Columbia, all these folks right here. And so I see that all of us between 5th Street and 4th Street on Columbia right here are mostly on Nextdoor. I will just kind of anecdotally share that the big piece of land we were talking about not wanting a hotel is the big red block right here, and I can never remember if my cursor is showing up on the screen. I believe it's not, but in any case, so it makes sense that those people are on Nextdoor. However, this might be a great opportunity, especially if I intend to keep posting about the census and keep the drumbeat going on. Maybe if I want to use data from the CUNY self-response map, which, as we've said again and again, has data by census tract, so you can get super, super targeted with it. Maybe we want to invite as many people because we want to make sure that we're all kind of tracking how well we're doing as an area and self-responding. One thing that Dr. Valenti mentioned on our weekly update on Monday, and something you may have seen in some communications from the Census Bureau, is that we think that these sort of census challenges are pretty effective. So, you know, if you have a rivalry with another neighboring neighborhood, like we do in the Houston Heights versus the Woodland Heights, then maybe you're using that CUNY self-response data that updates every day about 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Central Time, to kind of see how your neighborhood's doing, and you would start by making sure that as many of your neighbors are on as possible. So I have, you know, obviously email addresses for all of my neighbors from that variance, you know, kerfuffle, and so I could just as well invite them, or I could just walk right over and tell them that I would love to invite them to Nextdoor. Ooh, I just thought of another neighbor who just moved in that I can go after. So this map can be pretty useful. This will also show me what other surrounding neighborhoods I reach whenever I care. I could turn these on and off, but they do show me the most neighbors I can reach. And so I would assume this is about the same for us. It's typically based on the number of members and the population density of your neighborhood, not geographic. I think that's probably one thing that's a little unusual about Nextdoor, is that sometimes they will grow the neighborhoods that you're able to reach nearby really based on density. And we're not always used to that with these social media. So back to the home screen of Nextdoor, I want to now show you 3 different features. So we looked at the map here at the top. We know how to post a poll, an event, or just a general post with an image. But I want you to scroll all the way down. This is typical Nextdoor stuff. Is this your cat? Typical silly Nextdoor stuff. So down on the bottom left-hand screen, you will see something called neighbors, pets, and public agencies. For right now, I really only want to focus on the neighbors. And so let's say that you're on pretty good, you know, first name basis with a lot of people in your neighborhood, but because you see them around, but you don't have their email address or phone number. You see them walking the dog, something like that. So this directory in neighbors is a good way for you to go find people who you may want to reach out to about the census, again, knowing that they're more community and civic minded as a Nextdoor user, or to discover new people who you you can reach out to. Because once you have, been verified in your neighborhood and have that neighborhood reach of anywhere from 4,000 to about 30,000, I don't anticipate anybody would want to send a message to all of their, 4,000 of their closest friends. But there are ways that you could, just kind of decide. Maybe one day you're going to send 10 messages. Maybe one day you're going to send, 30 messages. Or maybe you'll set up a message tree with somebody else who is on your block or something like that. But going from directory neighbors and choosing to send one of these messages is going to be the fastest way to just get into somebody's inbox. Because it comes through as a private message, then it will, and I noticed Nextdoor is going very slowly today, so I hope that on Census Day and beyond, whenever we're doing all of this, that it will go a little faster. But I clicked on this person's name, ALFAR. Maybe I shouldn't be showing his full name because I don't know who he is, but I would send him a message that looks something like this. And rather than do that, I am going, ALFAR, I am going to find somebody who is actually on my street. Here we go. Let's find a Columbia who I don't recognize. Okie dokie. Let's just go to Adrienne Rocha. Don't know who that is, but I'm going to send her a message. So in the slide we'll be sending you later on, we provide some sample copy you can use to message your neighbors right now. And so, when we talk about kind of virtual block walking and virtual canvassing, really this is kind of what we're referring to. And we'll pick back up on this tomorrow in our 2 p.m. session. But think about whenever we do traditional forms of block walking or canvassing. We have, van or minivan, and it gives us a list of households to kind of walk down. Instead, what this is doing is just giving us direct access to people's inboxes, even though we may not have their contact information. And it actually allows us to reach more people than we would if we were doing traditional block walking or canvassing, because at a certain point, it's just copying and pasting. So I took my sample message that you will have in your slides as the takeaway for today, and I am going to send a message to Adrienne. And just because I'm a random guy, I'm going to say random note about the census. And I am just going to send this to her and see if she bites. She's never heard from me. She may see my picture and remember me because I walk around my neighborhood a lot and run around the neighborhood a lot. She could totally ignore me, but that was about a 10 or 15 second touch that I could do to a neighbor who I have a shared sense of community with, technically, and otherwise didn't have contact information for. So sending a message to neighbors in your directory is just that easy. Now, I think that another way that we can use Nextdoor is to reach out to local businesses. So again, all of the businesses that are kind of listed in Nextdoor, they also self-identify as community-minded, community-focused businesses. And so I might use the business directory, which doesn't have the 29,000 or the 4,000 that the neighbor directory has, to send a slightly different message. Now, we don't have the same kind of messaging feature, but what that does here is give you the ability to just see their email and email them directly. And so also in our slides as a sample message to businesses. And so I would look at this business page and I would see right off on the right-hand side the email for this person who is a local real estate agent, and say, hey, I was just wondering if you might use your platform to spread the word about the 2020 census. And I would copy and paste that email to that local business. And then across the site, you'll also see that some people are going to come up as sponsored. And so some of the easiest ways to find those categories are to, we're just going to switch gears here and talk just about local businesses, are to go through the local deals or the real estate section. Because then you can find the people who are kind of pay to play in Nextdoor. And so I'm scrolling for just a little while to see if you can find any that say promoted or neighborhood sponsor. And I don't see any on their local deals. So let's go to real estate. Because as far as advertising and neighborhood sponsorship goes, the real estate section is the main way that people do that, or real estate is the main kind of advertiser on Nextdoor. And so here we go. I see that there is a neighborhood sponsor on the upper right hand side. As a reminder, I came to this left sidebar under neighborhood and clicked real estate. And I see someone who is paying to have reach on Nextdoor and show up in the upper right hand corner whenever somebody comes to look at homes. Or Nextdoor also has this feature that draws in people where you can kind of connect with somebody who may be interested in listing your home for sale. So this person who is off on the upper right hand side, Becky Davis, Realtor with Compass Realty, and then the folks who are advertising off to the side here where it says for sale, those people are paying to play in Nextdoor and to show up here. So they may have an even broader reach than we have in our own little corner of the neighborhood. And I will say that one thing I know about Nextdoor neighborhood sponsorship is that it comes with 2 sponsored posts. And the sponsored posts get promoted to an even wider audience than the reach that we might have in our normal Nextdoor feed. And so this may be the perfect opportunity to see if this local business might be interested in using one of their sponsored posts. Sponsored content that's going to show up to send a message about the census. And so I also provide some sample copy on how you can approach a business on Nextdoor too. I think also as follow-up to this, instead of keeping the copy for these sample messages in the slideshow, we'll link to a document that actually will allow us to start to post more and more examples and that you can revisit. So look out for that. Definitely by the time we have our virtual block walking session and rethinking the in-person ground game section of tomorrow's Census Day activities. But just know that is how you can reach not only local business contacts, but folks who are actively promoting themselves on Nextdoor. That also means they're going to check their messages more frequently and stuff like that. And look at that. I came back, and in the upper right-hand corner of this screen again, they've already swapped out for another neighborhood sponsor. This is all based on impressions, by the way. And I can also do the same thing and send a message to Ramirez Roofing. And so wouldn't be a bad idea to refresh a couple of times if you get into this mode and see that if instead of Becky Davis with Compass Realty, Ramirez Roofing and Siding might be interested in using their platform to promote a message about the 2020 census. So as you dig into this, we would love to see if there is any message that you can continue to refine. I will say that the sample messages I put up right here are very, very generic. And that's just because, I just kind of wanted to show you a good approximate length that you want to follow, just some very basic messaging that you might work in. But we always think that anything you can do to personalize it and make it super specific to your neighborhood is going to take you a long way. So that is reaching businesses. The last thing I will show you on Nextdoor, as far as ways you can spread the word, is to do a very similar post to what we did into our general neighborhood feed to a group. And so the groups really run the gamut: conservative politics of Houston, pets lost and found, let's see, artists of Houston. This coronavirus informational update's obviously pretty big. And so we provide you some sample messaging that, again, you can just copy and paste into one of these groups. Some are private and some are public, where you can just click the join button, and then as soon as you join, then you can go in and post something directly into the group's feed. Whenever you join a group, you do see a screen like this that says, hi, welcome to the group. And so who knows, you may need to do a little bit of groveling here and say, hi everyone, I'm so excited to join this group. One of the reasons that I have joined this group is because I think it's super important that as many of us as possible self-respond to the census early on and continue spreading the word. So I look forward to getting coronavirus informational updates, but for right now, I just wanted to join the group to spread the word about the 2020 census. You'll see that the language that I put into the sample post, maybe after you're already done, or maybe after you don't give an introduction with caveats, that it just says, I want to interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to raise awareness about the 2020 census. And so that is, basically reaching the same audience or the same size of audience. I want to complete that. I don't want to do that. It also gives you the opportunity to invite people from there if you think they'd be interested in the group. But once I make my introduction, or just, just say submit without making the introduction, then I can do a post that looks exactly like the one that I was doing in the Nextdoor feed. Okie dokie. That is about everything I think you must know about Nextdoor. I'll just pick up a couple of highlights before picking back up on the the discussion of Census Day and the activities we'll be having tomorrow. While I mentioned earlier that public agencies can be a part of Nextdoor, not all are. And so just to quickly scan through here and see just the sorts of public agencies that can join, we have someone from the Houston Police Department. We have Harris County Public Health. I have seen the Planning Department on here. This has now become a really great way for planning commission, zoning boards to put up information about any big variances they have, and so people need to make noise about them. Lots of stuff from the police, and it can, because obviously our political subdivisions and jurisdictions overlap, then you will see in my particular neighborhood, for example, the Houston Police Department, but also our Harris County Sheriff, and then also our Harris County Constable, along with the county judge, the mayor's office, and different departments at City Hall. And so there are lots of public agencies that you could see across here, but you may sign up for Nextdoor. You may finally look at this public agencies tab that you may not have paid attention to anymore, and see that the public agency that you think should be most responsible for spreading the word about the U.S. Census is not on here, in which case you use the right-hand side, the sidebar that says About Public Agencies. You can email the Nextdoor team, and it says introduce us to your local public safety officials. All that really means is it's going to send you to a form where you can put in a contact. It may just even be a generic inbox for an agency who you think should be helping spread the word. So I know that it really depends across the state, who's really working to get out the count. It could be a council of the governments. It could be, a city government. It could be a county judge's office. So just use your judgment based on how you know the neighborhood to kind of disseminate information about this. I also... and I can't remember how I got to it, but I wanted to show that at least in my neighborhood, oh, here we go. On the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that the U.S. Census Bureau is already registered as a public agency on Nextdoor. However, I want to show you something. Just because the U.S. Census Bureau is here doesn't mean that they're posting updates about the census all the time. We definitely need census champions like you to spread the word. So automatically we're subscribed if the Census Bureau is in our neighborhood, automatically we're subscribed to updates from them. But you'll see that the community engagement team, which is very hardworking at the U.S. Census Bureau, and can't be in every single neighborhood stressing about every single Nextdoor post for households of only 4,000 at a time, only really has one post. Now, this is a super valuable post that is about counting college students in the right place. But it's only the one. And so just because the Census Bureau is technically on Nextdoor in your neighborhood doesn't necessarily mean that there's a wealth of information about the census. You can also choose to share this post in a private message. Let's say, and this is the last time I'll talk about my neighbors, let's say there's somebody you know who has kids in college right now, and you found that this information was going to be useful to them because they were a little confused, where they go to school, all that sort of stuff. And notice that this was posted on March 20th, and so this was right around the time that some operational changes were already taking place. And so this is pretty timely, rather for group quarters. So this is pretty timely information. You could decide to send that message to your neighbor. I'm trying to think. Oh, I should stop getting my neighbor's private information. But Val has a kid in college, and so I would send that to Val. I think. No, I do have a cell phone number. Anyway, the point is that I could send a message that is relevant to Val about counting college kids in the right place directly from the U.S. Census Bureau's feed on Nextdoor. All right. I think that is enough Nextdoor talk. Before we start to review our Census Day activities and talk about how you can prepare for those, which will be a pretty quick, brief, open-ended discussion, let's try to take a question. So here we go. Can you make a Google form or another shared location for all of us to submit copy, creative, etc. that we are trying and are finding impactful? Yes, anonymous attendee. We will definitely create that Google folder. We were going to disseminate that by the time of our first virtual breakout session tomorrow because we want to load up a folder with a bunch of great timely social media shareables and some copy that you can use in just one easy to find place. We do have that sort of stuff on our toolkit, but as we may have mentioned in a couple of our past updates and webinars, then we're really just wanting folks to share from the Texas Count social media. And so we are going to, kind of cut out one step where you have to go to the Texas Counts toolkit, download the materials. Instead, you can share right from our social media channels. And for the purposes of posting all together during our social media power hour and a half tomorrow, then we will centralize some of the best into one folder and share with all participants in that webinar, and then all participants in any previous webinar. All right, any more questions? I don't see any in the Q&A box. I don't see any in the chat box. All right, well then let us just return to our Census Day plans very briefly and just talk about specifically how you can prepare. So let's start with our coffee and census kickoff. And I will just say the best way to participate in that is just to send us some questions. You can email info@texascounts.org. You can go to any of our social media. We're at Texas Counts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And either message us a question. If you're on Twitter, you can at Texas Counts ask us a question. But we would love to have some questions answered live on air too. So if you register for that, then it will be a Zoom and Facebook Live. You can submit questions to us live using the Q&A function or by commenting on the Facebook Live post. And so for that, we just hope you'll have a nice cup of coffee and come and watch that either on Facebook or via Zoom. For our second session, again, that is all about applying some of the social media that we've been discussing over our last few sessions and completing some of those challenges that we've now got around to. And so two of the most interactive things we'll do, and this will not be a webinar in the sense that we'll be presenting a lot of information, we'll be handing over a lot of assets. We want to go back and forth a lot on, just like you were saying, anonymous attendee, on having, refining some of the best messages that we can send out, curating some of the best images, and then sending those out all together. And so that, depending on how many folks are involved and how much we want to interact, we'll either go from an hour to an hour and a half, but we're perfectly prepared to stretch that out to an hour and a half because there is so much to do. We would also like to, during that session in real time, complete the State Voices Census Challenge, which will involve taking a video and posting it to social media with some hashtags in addition to some other actions you can take. For our Rethinking the In-Person Ground game, then just to kind of really flesh out what we intend this session to be, we want to spend a good portion of it, kind of similar to how we were doing today, identifying potential local partners and natural partners in the era of COVID-19, right? So we know that only those businesses that are considered essential are still kind of open and able to interact with customers or have traffic coming through. And so that's in most of our communities going to be the grocery store and pharmacies that most people are going through. And so maybe we have some collateral, some palm cards, some flyers that we had printed just for Census Day. And maybe they even say April 1st all over them. And so if we can participate in this 2 p.m. session and brainstorm and kind of identify who those natural partners are, then maybe we can get them in the hands of those people by the end of Census Day, or definitely during Census Week. The other thing that we'll be talking about during that session is how you might kind of borrow from some of the ideas that are being done across the state and really across the country for kind of scaling those same sort of efforts. Let's use the example of the United Way, which had a bunch of stickers printed about their pledge to be counted and just about getting out the count. And so because they aren't able to have in-person events where they can buy those stickers and those flyers, then they partnered with local food banks so that the food bank bags that are being handed out have some census materials on them. I know a lot of you are already kind of thinking through this sort of stuff, and so this will be very interactive and that we'll think about the easiest ways to identify and make contact with those partners. Meals on Wheels is another great example for kind of repurposing those stickers and flyers. And then the last thing we'll do will be to revisit some of this Nextdoor conversation. If you were here today, then I would say you probably don't need to stick around for that session because it's going to be rather for that part of the session, which will really probably be just about a 30-minute section. I would plan to, just participate in rethinking the in-person ground game, but know that it will be very similar Nextdoor content to what we covered today. And then the last thing, I'm just going to plug this again because I think it's going to be so much fun. Please go follow us at Texas Counts so that you will see whenever we go live. And if you are remotely interested in connecting us with somebody who you think should be a part of this Hard to Count happy hour, then we want to, broaden our reach as much as possible. And, everybody is an influencer on Census Day. And so maybe you know somebody who has 500 followers and you're like, I don't know, maybe they have something to say about the census, maybe they don't. We want to get as many voices and uplift as many voices from various parts of the state and various communities as possible. So please consider joining our Hard to Count happy hour, at least as a viewer. All right, everyone, that is about all I wanted to cover today. Let's see, and we ended about the time I thought we would. And I think since we'll be spending so much time together, we don't have to stretch to the full hour. I would say let's take the next minute to see if you have any lingering questions. But I would hope that you would use the last 10 minutes to maybe put some of this into action, see if you are already signed up for Nextdoor or how easily you can be verified for your community, or to go and sign up for some of our Census Day events. Let's double check. No questions. And oh, here we go. Just got a question. What time is tomorrow's webinar? That is a wonderful, wonderful question, Maria. So we have 3 webinars tomorrow. We have one at 10 a.m., which is going to be mostly informational and Q&A. And then we have one at, and if you're looking at our slides, then you might just take a screenshot of this slide, or I can also say that as an attendee to this, then you can just refer back to the recap that we send. We'll include this flyer. So 10 a.m. is Coffee and Census Day Kickoff Q&A. And hearing from Texas Counts Partners, 12 p.m. is the Social Media Power Hour. 2 p.m. is Rethinking the In-Person Ground Game. Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. So Maria specified that she is El Paso. So these are all central times. And thank you so much for reminding us that we do switch time zones in our state. And so before we stress out anymore, then we will be sure to add that that is central time. All of these times are central time. All right, with that, everybody, I will leave you to go join and play around on Nextdoor, and we hope to see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us, and send us any questions that you might have after this.